So on the server, I have added this folder, models. And here we have a few simple classes. So in the patient class, we have properties like ID, name, which is decorated with the required attribute, medications, which is an I collection of medications, and address. Now note that both the medications and address properties have a private setter because initialization of this medications property, which is a collection, is the responsibility of this class. So I don't want anywhere else in the code to create a patient object and have to initialize its medications property to a new collection. This is bad practice. And I have used the same technique for the address property. So you can see in the constructor, I've initialized medications and address. Now we have two other model classes here, address and medication, but they're pretty similar, so I'm not going to go over them. But one thing I want to show you here is that if you're using VS Code, you can use one of the Yeoman generators to easily create a model class. So if you install generator-ASP.NET, you get access to a bunch of generators for ASP.NET applications. With this, we can go to the models folder and run yo ASP.NET class order. And this will generate this basic snippet that we can use to implement our order class. If you're using Visual Studio, you don't have to do this. You can easily add a new class or add a new controller, and Visual Studio will automatically generate this code snippet for you. But with VS Code, because VS Code is just an editor, it's not an IDE, we have to use one of the Yeoman generators. Now, if you head over to github.com/omnisharp/generator-ASP.NET, you can find all the sub-generators that are available to you. So here's ASP.NET class that I showed you. So I leave it up to you to play with this. We also have another generator, ASP.NET Web API controller. Let's call this medications controller. And this will generate a controller with all the CRUD operations. So here we have actions like get, post, put, and delete. All right, now let's take a look at our patient's controller. So here I have only implemented one action, post, for creating a new patient. The implementation is pretty standard, just basic ASP.NET MVC or core. So first we check if model state is not valid, then we return bad request. I'm going to show you in a second what we get in the response. Otherwise, if the model state is valid, potentially we are going to use a service to add this patient. Now, I have not implemented a service. I have not used Entity Framework or any other frameworks for persisting this patient object because that's really not within the scope of this section. Here, we're just focusing on the integration. Our Angular application does not care what happens on the server. Now, to simulate the generation of an ID, I've explicitly set the ID of this patient to 1. And finally, based on RESTful conventions, we return the newly created patient object to the client. So pretty simple, doesn't need any further explanation. Now there is one more piece to the server-side code. In the startup class, which is in the root of the project, here in configure services method, I have added this code to enable camel case notation. So by default, the JSON object that is returned to the client uses Pascal naming convention. Now here I have used this options object, set serializer settings.contract resolver to new camel case property names contract resolver. So to implement the form that you saw, first I implemented the server side, I implemented our controller, and then I used Postman to call this API to make sure it's working properly. I always prefer to do one step at a time. So here's Postman. If you don't have it, simply go to Google and search for Postman extension. So here's Postman. When you install it, you'll find it under apps here. So here's Postman. Okay, now in Postman, we're going to send a post request to localhost port 5000/API/patients. And in the body of the request, select raw, change the type to JSON. So here I add a patient object with the name patient1 address, with street, and city. Let's not worry about medications because they are not required. Now, if we click send, this is what we get. So you can see ID is set to 1, and we get the same patient object that we sent to the server. However, if you remove this name property and street property of address, let's see what happens. We get these errors. So for each invalid property, like name, we get an array of errors. Each error is a string. Now, what is interesting here is that even though we enabled camel casing notation, this subproperty street is still coming as Pascal notation. So I believe there is a bug in camel case contract resolver in ASP.NET Core, and it cannot properly apply camel case to subproperties. All right, so our API is working properly. Next, we're going to look at the client-side implementation.